All right. You are live, it says. And we are back in the good old format. Let's see if people are reacting to my presence. Hello, can you hear me? All the usual stuff. Yeah, no guests this week. Definitely enjoyed having Linus on 2 weeks ago, but don't have anything like that for today, although I would love to do it again sometime in the future. So we are back. It's SerenityOS office hours, and we're going to do what we always do, take random questions about SerenityOS programming and adjacent related topics. Whatever you want to talk about, we'll get into it. And wow, we have a lot of people here today. Hello, Caleb. Hardcore Vibes. That's a nice golden yak you have there. Hello, Fred, Johannes, Blue Yes, Undefined, and bunch of people here. Very, very nice to see you all. I hope that everybody's having a happy and productive week. Mine has been full of compiler programming, which is not my usual comfort zone, but it's good to be outside of that and learn new stuff. So let's see. And yeah, so what we always do here is we just take random questions about SerenityOS or Yacht or surrounding topics. So anything goes, ask whatever you want, and we'll talk about it. So Blue Yes asks, what are my VS Code settings? So in VS Code, I don't have any special settings other than installing some extensions, but I didn't customize the key mappings or settings in any particular way. So it's pretty much defaults. And let's see, German WTB says, at some point you converted all pass by const reference of act string view to pass by value. Do you think the same should be done for all the endpoints and in Painter? Oh, interesting. That's a good question. I think probably yes. For the exact same reason that you would do it for string views, you would also do it for endpoint. So the reason for string view is that there is no added value in passing string view around by const reference on any of the ABIs that we care about. And that's because it can fit in registers instead of being shuffled onto the stack, which is what happens when we use a const reference in some cases. And yeah, so the size of int point, for example, int point, float point, is actually even smaller than a string view. So for that reason, we could probably do the same, and maybe we should do the same. There was a blog post, string view pass by reference or value. I forget. Yeah, this is the one. Qx+1 by Arthur O'Dwyer. I'm going to link that in the chat because I found it like a very compelling post about the subject of passing these things by value or by const reference. Blue Yes says, I am loving the Yacht hacking videos. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I don't know why I was not recording many of those. And then 2 days ago, I realized, wait a minute, I can just record what I'm about to do, and then I'll get a video out of it. And then I did the same thing yesterday. And I don't know. Sometimes I sort of get out of the habit of recording videos, and I get comfortable not doing it. And I need to kind of snap out of that and just start recording stuff again. So I'm happy that you like them. Let's see. Yeppy asks if I updated my desktop. Yeah, right. So I have the latest Ubuntu Mate at the moment, and I also did the wild and crazy change of moving my taskbar from the top to the bottom. Not really for any specific reason, just decided to move it one day to see what would happen, I guess. Let's see. Lithium is asking, Lisp interpreter for SerenityOS when? I don't know. Don't we already have a Lisp interpreter in the ports tree? I don't even know. One of these might be a Lisp. If there isn't one, I'm sure you could port one or write one. But Lisp is not really interesting as a language to support for Serenity because we're not doing anything with Lisp, and it doesn't really fit into the system on the whole. Like we have this whole other language paradigm that the system is built around, and I don't think that adding Lisp would be a good fit. Let's see, Blue Eyes asks, how do you have such low latency on YouTube? Well, I don't know exactly if I'm doing something special, but I did set it to ultra low latency. That is a setting that you can set on the streaming page. I'm trying to find it now, but I don't know where to click. It's called ultra low latency. Yes, that's the one. So that's how I did it. Let's see. And also Blue is asking, what is my mate theme? I don't actually know what it's called. Let's look it up. Answering the important questions here. Yeah, so it just says custom up here, but I know that I picked it from this list. I think it's maybe this one, Yaru Sage Dark. I think that might be the one. Johannes is asking, how does one become a 10x developer? Well, that's a hotly contested subject these days, but I think the way to become more productive, not to like fixate on a specific multiplier or number, right? But the way for most people that I've talked to, that they can immediately become more productive is to waste less time on unproductive things, such as watching Netflix and things like that. And of course, many different people have different things that are holding them back, but in the conversations that I've had with people, it's been a lot about like, oh, I spend all this time playing video games, and I'm not developing as a programmer as much as I would like to. And it seems to me that by cutting out some of your entertainment budget and reallocating that to personal development, you can start to increase your multiplier. Not saying that would work for everyone, but there seems to be a lot of people who spend a lot more time and money on entertaining themselves than they are really comfortable with, yet they keep doing it. And I've certainly been that person myself as well in the past. And I found that the more I would steer away from that, the happier I would get, and also the more productive I would feel and the more stuff I would get done. So that is sort of my generic go-to advice when somebody wants to become more productive, is do less unproductive stuff so that you have more time for what you consider productive stuff. And then, of course, if you have a specific situation, then we can look at specifics. But in terms of generic advice, I guess that's what I would say. Requity is asking, animated wallpapers for Serenity. I don't think that's something that we're doing anytime soon. It would be very difficult to do animated wallpapers in any kind of performant way at the moment, because we do all the compositing on CPU. So in order to animate the wallpaper, it would mean that we would have to sort of repaint something underneath everybody else, every frame potentially. I guess it depends on how the animation is made, and if we can have some sort of sophisticated invalidation tracking. There's probably a way to make some animations work, but it would be a lot nicer if it were like a GPU composited, right? And then you could just animate some kind of a root layer and then let the GPU worry about not wasting a bunch of work there. Anyway, I haven't really thought about it in any great depth, as you can probably tell. Let's see. Abhishek is asking, hey Andreas, what's the new font you have been using? So are you talking about my code font that I'm using? Type check. this font right here, that's called Berkeley Mono. Berkeley Mono, and it's from this website right here, if you want to check it out. I am still on the demo version of it, but I'm liking it so far. Let's see. Tarun says, I started working through crafting interpreters around the same time you started talking about Yacht. It's been a great source of inspiration and also a good reference for my own implementation. Cool. I have not read all of crafting interpreters. I've just skimmed parts of it, but I'm really happy that stuff like that exists. For me personally, I just struggle to absorb information from books, and I have to sort of practice. Even if I mess everything up, I learn much faster if I just try to do it badly, and then sort of come back to read a book once I've sort of brute forced an implementation of something, and then I can go and read a book about it, and then learn how I should have done it, and then it sticks in my head. But I guess I'm a little bit jealous of people who can read a book first and absorb the knowledge that way, and then bypass the whole building a piece of crap part of the process that I go through. But everybody's different, and that's a good thing. Let's see. John McGarty was asking, do you have any specific preferences when it comes to computer hardware? No, not at all, actually. I will use anything. My main concern, I guess, is that I want something that's relatively silent, and my current machine is not as silent as it could be. So that's something I keep meaning to investigate doing something about it, but I'm a little bit limited in terms of space here in this room, so there's only so much I can do. But I'm happy to use any machine that can run the programs I want to run. Like, I don't care about manufacturers or brands or anything like that. Anything that can compile my files and display my desktop is cool with me. I guess the one thing I would say is I did really enjoy the boost I got from getting a GPU that could do live encoding of video, because my videos used to take like an hour or 2 hours sometimes to encode, and after I got a good GPU, now I can encode an hour-long video in 20 minutes instead of an hour, which is really sweet. So I guess now I do have a preference that my computer has a dedicated GPU with hardware encoder. Blue Eyes was asking, VS Code theme. Lots of theme questions today. This one is called, I think it's called Material, Community Material Theme Darker. That's the one. I got it from the built-in theme installer. I was just trying all of them and settled on that one. Krishna was asking, why is Yacht written half in C++? I'm not sure what you mean by that. It's not written in C++ unless you are referring to the runtime. The runtime is written in C++ because the intent with Yacht is that it's going to interact with our existing C++ code base and sort of slot into it. And then the big experiment that we want to make, if things work out that way, is to see if we can incrementally replace our C++ code with Yacht code. And for that to work, we make Yacht generate C++, and then sort of iteratively, incrementally replace piece by piece until we have an entirely new boat in the same place of the old boat. Lithium is asking how to be productive, or saying how to be productive. Delete games and unplug internet. Yes, seriously. That's probably a pretty good strat. let's see. Sophia says, someone working on reproducible builds told me that they are unhappy with Rust being self-hosted and not having another implementation. Do you think Yacht may get the same problem? So I think to the first part of what you're saying, there are alternate implementations of Rust cropping up. I saw, I feel like just on Hacker News earlier today, or like very recently, there was something right here. Yeah, like 1 hour ago about adding a Rust compiler front end to GCC, which I think is Phil talking about his work on, I want to say it's called GCC Rust, but I may be mixing it up with some other thing. Anyway, I'm just going to drop that in the chat if somebody wants to go check out Phil's talk. So there are alternative implementations of Rust happening. They're just not caught up to mainline Rust, as I understand it. Which it's going to take some time, you know, for them to reach maturity, but that's a good development. Do I think Yacht would have the same problem? Well, it's definitely going to be a situation where we have a single implementation of Yacht, which will be sort of the reference implementation. And since the main purpose of Yacht is to be a language for the SerenityOS project, I don't think that we will be hurrying up to like make sure that we get alternate implementations and things like that. And so, I don't know. I don't even know if it's a problem for us. Like our technical problem is to make the best possible language for SerenityOS, and everything else was going to have to be sort of a secondary priority. I think that's the perspective to take on this. So would it be nice to have alternate implementation? Sure, eventually. But is it in any way a necessity for our goals? No, absolutely not. So I don't think I'm worried about that. Let's see. Sophia says, I guess it would also depend on how well readable the C++ output of the self-hosting Yacht compiler is. Right. And that's not necessarily going to be super readable. Ultimately, I don't think we'll be like, we're not going to be choosing readability over performance in most cases, I think, for the generated code. And lately, one thing that we're noticing as we're building the compiler is that transpiling to C++ is very sensitive performance-wise, because not necessarily for the performance of the generated executable in the end, but the performance of the compiler that you feed the generated C++ to. Like the self-hosted Yacht compiler right now takes about 10 seconds to compile on my machine when I'm not recording video at the same time. And that's a huge amount of time. And earlier today, I was profiling it and found that most of that time, most of those 10 seconds is like instantiating C++ templates. So our compiler, our Yacht compiler spits out a bunch of code that uses C++ templates, and then when Clang compiles to C++, it ends up just spending most of its time dealing with the C++ templates in the generated code. And I am not super happy about that, and there are some approaches that we can take that will sort of use less fancy C++ in the generated code, do like more C-like hacks that will make the code less readable, less flexible, but compile a lot faster, potentially run faster, but probably run about the same ideally. And that's an area where I feel like in many cases I can already tell that it's going to be a choice between like readable generated code and extremely slow to compile or rather, it's a choice between readable generated code and fast to compile generated code. And in many cases, I think we're going to be choosing fast to compile generated code, if those are the two options. But it's still early, you know, that we still have a lot of experimentation to do, and maybe there's ways that we can trick the C++ compiler into handling our templates faster. I don't know. I mean, we're still learning how to make sense of clang traces and things like that. Let's see. Hardcore Vibe says, I as well can't learn from books. It's all learning by doing and learning from mistakes. Yes. Learning by stepping in poop, basically. But that's always been my way. Wicked Energy suggests I should remove the fan from the computer. That's a great idea. I'll get right on that. Let's see. Randy Tang says, lol, why do you guys spec out your hardware so much? That's gonna mask how inefficient the software is written, no? You want your software to run smoothly on low spec, right? So I guess this was in reference to people talking about hardware specs. So I certainly want the software I write to run well on lower spec machines if possible, but at the same time I have computing tasks that I care about, like making videos, live streaming, and doing video audio editing, stuff like that, which is heavily dependent on or it's like heavily influenced by the performance of the machine. And with that in mind, like I sort of end up with a powerful machine, so I can do those things in a nice way, and I kind of sacrifice having a low spec machine to target for development. So I have mixed feelings about this. Like I don't necessarily like that I don't see low spec environments in my daily work, but at the same time, I don't know what the solution is to that. I guess one thing that we do a bunch when we're working on Serenity stuff is to turn off like hardware virtualization and run with the QEMU JIT instead, because that very often that's a good way to flush out concurrency bugs and weird race conditions. So I do end up seeing a slower mode sometimes, but it's so much slower that it's not really the same as having a slightly slower machine. Actually, I do have my laptop, which I've been using a lot lately, especially since I've been traveling a bit lately, just visiting nephews and stuff. I've been bringing my laptop with me, and that's significantly slower. It takes well over 20 seconds to build the self-hosted Yacht compiler. And you know, in fact, I do think that my laptop was one of the reasons that I started worrying about performance of the self-hosted compiler in the first place. Like we did some compile time optimizations like a few weeks ago, and that was like me being frustrated on the laptop. So I guess there is some truth to this, that like if you spend time on a low spec machine, then you do end up annoyed by issues like with a greater intensity, and that does affect what I choose to do with my time. So it's true. And okay, yeah, that's a really healthy thing. I need to do more of that, actually. I need to spend more time on my laptop, even at home, I think, so that I can try to make it better. All right, glad that we could work that out. Okay, so did I miss a bunch of stuff here? Let's see. Chihiro was asking, hello, Andreas, how to deal with concerns about eventually being fired due to some silly mistake you may not even notice. Well, how to deal with concerns about being fired due to something you didn't even notice. I guess everybody makes mistakes, and worrying about the consequences to the point where it's like stressing you out might even accelerate the making of your next mistake, right? Because you hype yourself up and you make yourself worried, and you're living in this constant state of nervousness about this. So you probably want to find some way to let go. And I would say speaking with your manager about this and making sure that you have sort of a good relationship with your manager so that you speak openly about mistakes. Like any mistakes that you've made in the past, for example, make sure that your manager knows about them. And I think it's very normal that we make mistakes in work. Like if you work somewhere for a year and you don't make a single mistake, that's pretty impressive. I certainly made tons of mistakes at every company that I worked at. And I didn't always tell my manager about my mistakes. I would try to cover them up or fix them before anybody noticed, things like that. But as I got older, I started actually telling my manager about things I messed up, and that eventually like helped me a lot to worry less about making mistakes, because having a healthy dialogue with your manager so that you have the kind of relationship where if you fuck something up, you know that you can go and speak to your manager and say like, hey, I fucked something up. And you know what the typical response to that is. You know how you're going to work on fixing it and like coming up with preventative measures to avoid the mistake in the future, things like that. I guess what I'm trying to say is build a relationship with your manager so that you don't worry about what might happen if you make a mistake, so that you know what happens when you make mistakes, because everybody does. Hope that makes sense. Randy was asking, is it safe to assume you don't care much for agile practices or any plan-based approaches to software engineering? Well, I can't say that I've ever enjoyed working in a team that uses agile, but I'm not against it or anything. I just think that it sucks a lot of the fun out of working on software for me. I don't know what it is about it. There's just something kind of I don't know. It's kind of a wet blanket for me. But I can see the value in it, especially it's always challenging when you have people who are primarily motivated by their salary, right? And how do you get those people to work on something efficiently, and how do you get them to cooperate and coordinate as well as possible if you can't rely on what we have in open source software, where like a lot of people are just there because they love it. They just want to work on the thing. When you don't have that, and you have people with sort of extrinsic motivation, I guess, then methodologies like Agile can be very efficient at getting everybody to row the boat in the same direction. So I'm absolutely not against it. I think it has immense value in situations where people are not intrinsically motivated, but I don't enjoy being in that kind of team personally. So a bit more nuance to the answer, I guess, but that's how I feel. Let's see. Mitchell Bumgarner says, good morning, Andreas, and everyone in chat. Good morning to you, Mitchell. Fun fact for the day. Our power went out from a storm, so I'm just eating my breakfast, watching this on a laptop in the dark. Oh my goodness. Well, let's see if you have enough battery to make it to the end of the stream. Bartos was asking, do you plan on making Yacht compile to bytecode later on? I don't know. We haven't really thought that far ahead. So right now, the goal is to compile to C++ and try to integrate with the Serenity codebase and If we make it to the end of this experiment and we're happy with how it went, and then we're sitting there with a code base that's entirely yucked, and there's no remaining C++ other than the generated stuff from yucked, then what we do, I don't know yet, but somehow, obviously, at that point, it doesn't make sense anymore to generate C++ if we can just generate some other kind of IR, like whether that's LLVM IR, or if we build our own, like our own compiler backend as well, who knows? What typically happens in the Serenity project is that we build something ourselves, but I don't know because it's so far away now. So we'll see when we get there. One thing is right now, I am definitely not an advanced compiler programmer. Like I don't know a lot about compiler design, compiler engineering, or techniques to use in a compiler. I'm just sort of picking up as much as I can while we're building this thing, and we have people like JT working on the compiler who has a lot more experience than I do with building languages, and I'm kind of just riding the wave of other experts. We have Ali as well, who's very knowledgeable and experienced with compilers, and I'm sure there are other people as well that have credentials that I'm just unaware of, because I can see that we have people around who are informed about these topics, but me personally, like I'm still learning as I go, and I think over time I'll become more comfortable and I will have a better clue about what we'll eventually do when it comes to like lowering to machine code. But at the moment, I'm not like even sophisticated enough to know what the options really are or what the trade-offs would be. So that's we'll get there. Anyway, let's see. Blue Yes was asking, how come the README for self-host Yuct says that CodeGen is at 0%, but in your video you were able to generate C++ code? Aha, so that is because the README is outdated. The README just has some random estimates where JT took some numbers from the magical place in the universe where numbers appear and put those in there. So it's outdated, that's why. Let's see. Michael says structs are passed by value. That is absolutely right. Let's see. Wicked Energy is asking, what OS do you have on your laptop? I have Ubuntu on my laptop as well. Kind of the same as on this machine. It's just a stock Ubuntu Mate, the latest LTS, so nothing fancy. Paul Rat says, fast on low spec equals faster on better machines. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Certainly, when I worked at Apple, one of my greatest memories was the year when management asked us to use slower devices, like older iOS devices, and target those specifically with what we did that year. That was an awesome year, and at the time sometimes it was annoying to use like these older iPhones, where things were a bit sluggish compared to the new iPhones that we all also had, but they got so many people to focus on improving the experience on older hardware. It was fantastic, and I forget which iOS release it was, but it was great. I loved it, and the performance improvements that we did on slower hardware absolutely made a difference on the faster hardware as well. It's just that you didn't notice it as much as you did on the slower hardware. But the people who still had the older devices, I'm sure they were happy about that release. And then I don't know if they ever if they ever did that sort of thing again, because I left the company, so I don't know if they work like that anymore, but that was a good year. Let's see. Leonardo is asking, how are you feeling working on the Yak compiler? What is the biggest challenge for you? I'm feeling good working on it. I feel sometimes a bit slow, like I'm not going at the pace that I like to program at. I feel kind of slow thinking and a little bit stupid, but that's natural when you move into a domain that you're not an expert in. Like if you're used to feeling like a master of your domain, and then you traverse slightly sideways and get out of your comfort zone, and then the difference can be huge. And I'm definitely feeling some of that. And the biggest challenge is probably that I don't have a mental model of a compiler that's strong enough to build a compiler. So I'm really leaning on the other people like JT, like I mentioned, and Ali, to sort of provide that mental model, and I can just do I do what I feel is sort of like grunt work, just writing lots of code to make the thing stand up. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to, is gaining that mental model of a compiler by doing a bunch of work on one. But that is challenging, to not have a strong mental model, or as strong as I'm used to, at least. As Salur says, will Yacht have a bug catcher like PVS Studio? I think we're definitely not going to have any third-party static analysis tools out of the box or out of the gate. Maybe one day. Or instead, we're going to do our best to make the compiler help catch as many bugs as possible. So by making warnings and errors and diagnostics in the compiler, one advantage that we have with this project is that we are the only customer of Yacht, so we can be very rigorous or very strict about what we consider correct code, and we don't have to support like many different coding styles, right? We just have to support our coding style, and then we can make that the law, and we should be able to build compiler diagnostics around a pretty strict idea of what code in Yacht should look like. And I feel like that's something where C++ kind of loses immediately, because there are just so many different variants of C++. Like any company you go to that uses C++, they all use it slightly differently. So there isn't like one dialect that fits everybody. And with Yacht, we get that. We have that advantage. We have like the one dialect that fits everybody, because that's the one that we're going to use. And it seems logical to me that it will be easier to build better tools faster given that. But we'll see if it works out in practice. Let's see. Blueya says the in-game name Andreas Kling is available on Minecraft Java Edition, just to let you know. Well, I think actually I think I already have a Minecraft Java account, and my name is Awesome Kling. So that name, I don't need that name. I'm already Awesome Kling. Let's see. Darius says, I think good programming is to a large part to work with the hiccups that just come with being a human. I guess that's kind of true. Yeah. Because a lot of the time, like, humans can be very logical, right? But we are also emotional, and programming is very logical. And certainly our emotions do get in the way, but you don't want to give up the emotional aspects of your life, so you have to learn to work with your emotions, right? So I think you're right that you have to sort of good programming is learning to work around the emotional side of things and focusing on the logical. Martin asks, have you considered using TLA Plus to mathematically prove the stability of the system? I have not considered that. But I can tell you right now, even without mathematical proof, that the system is still not very stable. Don't need any fancy techniques to establish that. Maybe one day when the system is extremely stable, then we can start wondering, how do we measure stability here? But at the moment, it's rare to have a system that stays up for 24 hours without running into some kind of issue. Ahmed asks, what shows / sitcoms do you enjoy? Well, recently I watched a show called Yellowstone, which I don't know how I ended up watching it, but it was captivating. It was about like a rancher family in Montana. I hadn't watched anything like it ever before, but it was quite enjoyable. So still watching that, but I've been enjoying it. Let's see. Ooh, Randy with a super chat saying, "Yacked the planet." Thank you, Randy, for the super chat. Yak the planet indeed. Let's hack the planet. Let's get one of those. Hack the planet. Very cool. I bet we could make some kind of sweet graphic on this theme. Thank you for the 20. Very much appreciate that. Let's see. Hashem is saying, you mentioned that Yacht code starts going horizontal quite quickly. I think I've seen a simple solution to this problem somewhere, and I feel it could be useful. Adding a comma after the last parameter / argument formats the code vertically. This fixes some of too much horizontalized code. Yeah, so it's absolutely the case that we have rightward drift issue in the language at the moment, and it's not as bad as the Rust baseline compiler, but like you can see here that we are just drifting to the right. And from my perspective, the main reason that this happens is because we are lacking some important constructs. For example, here, instead of this thing where you are matching on a single variant of this enum, this could be an iflet if we had iflet, right? So if you would instead write it this way, then you could de-indent here. And so on. And then you could do the same thing. I think you could do the same thing one more time with this thing right here. Could also be an iflet. And there are a bunch of different language constructs that we'll eventually want to have in Yacht as well to fight that rightward drift or that horizontal expansion. But as I mentioned in the last couple of videos, we're just kind of holding off on making changes to the language right now until we have the self-hosted compiler up and running and compiling itself, because at the moment, like introducing any new feature to the language means that you have to write 2 implementations of it. And it also means that the self-hosted compiler being finished just takes that much longer because we keep adding to things it has to support. So at the moment, we're simply not adding features to the language, but that's absolutely something that I want to work on improving once we start adding features. So iflet, absolutely, and other things like the guard expression, or what do they call guard statements, I guess, from Swift. Want to do something like that as well. CCLX is asking, does Yacht already have some kind of new unique feature that other languages don't have? I don't think so. I think it's very much the same approach as Serenity, where we just take all the good ideas from other places, like all the cool ideas that we like, and then we steal them and put them into the thing that we're making. That's kind of always been the concept of Serenity, and that concept extends to the language. That we're not trying to invent a radical new language. We're just trying to make something that is the nicest possible language by taking all the nice ideas from other people. Let's see. Obina says, oh wait, hello Andreas, finally got Serenity to build on my machine and also made my first pull request. Excited. Looking forward to contributing more to Serenity. Obina from Nigeria, by the way. Hello Obina, and welcome to the Serenity project. I am happy to have you here. I'm really happy to hear that you made your first pull request, and I hope that you will find many things that annoy you so that you can work on them as well. It is always awesome when new people find the project and start having fun with it. That has been fun. That was fun the first time, and it's fun still today. So welcome. And if you're not already on Discord, then, you know, come to Discord and get involved. Let's see. Vinit says, hi Andres, what happens if you lose interest in SerenityOS in some years and want to do something else? Community strong enough to take it forward? Well, I don't know. It seems unlikely that I would lose interest in SerenityOS because that would mean I lost interest in programming. The nice thing about Serenity is that it has such a huge scope that even if you get tired of entire categories of programming, there's still other stuff to do within the project that's still interesting. So I kind of designed it in such a way that the scope is large enough that there's always going to be something that I want to work on. So I don't realistically see myself ever getting bored with it or losing interest. But at the same time, the future is uncertain. Is the community strong enough to take it forward? I guess that's something that we would have to find out if that ever happens. And as Paul says here, translation is, when are you going to die? Well, I guess if I did die, we would find out very quickly what happens. I think there's definitely a strong community that loves working on the project, and I have faith in the community that they will continue developing the system somehow. I don't know how or what would become of it, but I know that they would keep working on it somehow. Maybe some of the things you would kind of discover. What were the things what are the things that are in place just because Andreas feels strongly about them, right? So maybe if I died, then people would decide to, oh well, let's stop doing this mono repo thing and just split it into 50 repositories. Now that we don't have to deal with Andreas, I don't know. Who's to say? But I don't think that I'm gonna fall out of interest with it anytime soon. But I might die. We'll see. Hopefully not. Tim Trickle says, hi Andreas, I'm thinking about writing a small cloud file server and clients which uses rsync like file transfer. Because Windows doesn't have rsync, I thought about implementing it myself. Thoughts? I think that sounds like a cool idea. What are my thoughts? Yeah, do it. If you ever find yourself with sort of a technical problem and you're thinking like, should I build this thing that seems interesting to me, then the answer is obviously yes. Of course you should build anything that seems interesting to you. At least for long enough until you find out if it's really interesting or if you would rather do something else. I think some of the most fun I've had in my life has been just randomly deciding to try and build something that seemed interesting. So I think you should absolutely do that. Let's see. Jack Nitti says, I remember an interesting concept from Serenity C++ was badge. Do you think that would make it into Yacht eventually? Aha! It already did. It already did. let's see. So in Yacht, we have badges, but instead in the form of restricted functions. So here, this specifies that this function, getSecret, can only be called by a class called A. So only A can call this. And open the bank vault can be called by A or B. So this is how we express partially exposed functions. So we don't have badges, but instead we have a dedicated access specifier called restricted. And this was added by Sam, I think, who worked on this in the compiler a couple of weeks ago. Pretty cool. Ahmed says, what do you think of VLang, by the way? I don't really have any opinion on VLang. I haven't written enough of it to have an opinion. Jason L says, what is your new process during the last Yacht video to avoid killing it in your OBS? I noticed you hadn't killed it at all in the newest Yacht video. Right. Yeah, so what I did was I just ended up wrapping the compiler in a command that terminates the compiler if it runs for longer than 10 seconds or 5 seconds even. And I think the way I actually implemented it in actual terms was I went and I hacked the editor extension. So here, let me see. In the server.ts for the IDE extension for VS Code, there's an exec here. Yeah, run compiler. There's a function called run compiler that does an await exec here. And what I did was I just put this here, I think. And that's the whole trick. And I got so many messages from people suggesting using timeout and using various other techniques like temporary C groups and whatnot. And obviously, all of them nice ideas. My solution that I had, ridiculous. So this is the way that I set it up for the video yesterday. And we should probably actually put this in the repo somehow. I worried that this wouldn't work on macOS and Windows. I know that some people build Yacht on macOS and Windows, so I wanted to make sure that we come up with a solution that doesn't step on that. Which basically means I wanted to talk to JT about it because I know JT uses Windows. But yeah, that was the solution. Let's see. Vinit says, thank you for the answer. To be honest, I never want you to ever stop working on it, but it is a plausible scenario that many passionate open source software developers lose interest or get burnt out. You are an inspiration to many of us. I know your story of the origin of Serenity. Right. Sure. Yeah, it's definitely a thing that happens that people burn out. And I've tried to set up Serenity, or the way that I think of SerenityOS for myself, in a way that minimizes the, let's say, minimizes the chances of burnout. So, for example, the Serenity project very specifically does not cater to end users. It's like a system that's made for its own developers, by its own developers, and it's only interested in its own developers. So in theory, like everybody who cares about the system and works on the system, we are all the users. So there isn't a stream of people who complain that's, oh, this thing isn't working. Anybody who complains that something isn't working in Serenity is expected to a degree to be able to fix it for themselves. Or if they're not able to fix it for themselves, then they can barter with somebody who can fix it. And what they trade is that, like, they work on something else that person cares about, or loosely anyways. I think that's one thing that it seems to me leads to burnout in open source in many cases, is that you end up maintaining one or more projects where you have all these users clamoring for your attention and like demanding that you fix certain things or demanding that you implement features that they want or whatever. And with even with compensation, but often without compensation, like that is not that's not going to be fun for anybody in the long term. So I'm trying to be conscious of that and trying to just steer in a completely different direction by just at every opportunity just saying, this is not for end users, you know, this is for developers, this is for ourselves. And I guess sometimes that might seem a little bit like I don't know, like some people might find it a little unpleasant, maybe that we're saying, oh, this is not for end users, but it's really not. It's not stable enough to be used by anyone who's not a developer or not tech savvy, let's say. You don't have to be a programmer to use it, but you have to be tech savvy for sure. And I don't think that's going to change. And part of the reason why I like that so much is because it protects myself and everyone else as well from this type of burnout that comes with putting yourself at the mercy of, you know, hundreds or thousands of end users who are going to complain but not contribute. But I don't know. That's there are definitely other things that can lead to burnout as well. That's just like the major thing that I know about, that I sort of try to design away and at a project level. Let's see. Ola H asks, do plan to limit file access and resource access based on application identity in addition to user identity? Well, there isn't really a plan, one way or the other. But at the moment, we have Unix file permissions, and the system governs access to resources via traditional Unix file system access. And there isn't really such a thing as application identity. There is user and group identities. And of course, applications or processes have, they're owned by a user and group, but there isn't like an application ID type of thing. Bankas says, oh wait, hold on. CCLX says, I just recently saw your first video about the Serenity browser where you said that unlike other browsers, you don't want to develop a JIT compiler because of the complexity. Do you still think that's the right approach after doing things like compiling to bytecode, etc., that add complexity to increase performance? Well, I think the major trade-off when it comes to JIT compiling is not just one of complexity, but one of security. Because in order to JIT compile, you have to invite the runtime construction of code. So you're basically compiling to machine code at runtime and then executing that runtime generated machine code in some way. No matter how much you sandbox your JIT compiler and the tricks that you do to isolate it, at the end of the day, you're still generating code and running generated code at runtime. And there are severe security drawbacks to that. If you look at the Microsoft Edge browser, they have this ongoing project that they're calling the super duper secure mode, which is a very cute name. But it's essentially Edge offers a mode where they turn off the JIT so that you get a much smaller bug surface area in their browser. And obviously there are security versus performance trade-offs, but I think that the fact that they are doing it in Edge still as an experiment, but in a serious experiment that they are running, means that it's not a completely crazy idea to try to see if we can make a usable browser without a JIT. I think I still tend to think that JavaScript compilers went JavaScript compilers went a little crazy. Like the performance race, the performance wars between browsers got really, really heated. And it was cool to see all of the things that were possible. But at the end of the day, you have like these massively complex compilers, like compiling and recompiling constantly at runtime. And there's been, so many exploits in these various JIT compilers, and I don't know if it's worth it just to get that like extra edge of performance on a tiny fraction of web content. I am skeptical about that, and at the same time, I also see what happens if you have a completely unoptimized engine. Like if you take the Serenity JavaScript engine, you point it at Google Maps, and you suffer through the slightly broken UI, then you'll notice that, yes, it's too slow to give you a good Google Maps experience, but it's probably possible if we improve the engine, improve the bytecode engine, and do various optimizations that don't require jitting, to give a good experience without generating machine code. I still believe that. And at the same time, of course, it's technically interesting to make a JIT because you can do a lot of fun stuff. But is it the right thing to do? I don't know. It seems to me that it would be nice to build a browser that focuses more on just being correct as much as possible and being as secure as possible, and maybe not making performance the primary concern, like some other browsers have done for many years. I don't know. But yeah, I guess that's sort of my current thoughts on that. Thank you for asking about that. It's definitely an interesting subject that I keep reevaluating, keep thinking about more and more. It's absolutely the case that our current JavaScript engine is not fast enough for a lot of dynamic web content, like Google properties, for example. We do need to improve it significantly. But I don't know that going the JIT compiler route is necessary. Bunkus was asking, what are your thoughts on runtime introspection and user-accessible modifications like Emacs? Since Serenity is built in a single technological stack, it makes it particularly possible. Not sure how good candidate C++ is, but with Yect could just be. Right, so one thing that we tried messing with earlier in Serenity was exposing application state to the outside world, so that we had this thing called the inspector. I mean, we still have it, but it doesn't really work much anymore. Where we had a tool where you could connect to any running application and manipulate it. You could manipulate various things by like changing properties live, and you would see the changes reflected in the application. But the more that I thought about that, the more it seemed like just a gaping security hole. The fact that every application was like basically had a built-in backdoor that you could connect to it and mess around with it. I think it could make sense as like a cool debugging tool, but I don't know that it's a good idea to have that sort of complete introspection by default in a production build or whatever. I think there's absolutely a use case for sort of selective introspection, where an application can choose to expose certain things as API or whatever, so that you can do things like AppleScript on macOS. But having it sort of automatically enumerate every object in your program and just like publishing that to anybody who's interested, that was not really the right approach. But to your question, like, would that be easier with Yacht? Probably. My hope is that everything will be easier with Yacht. But citation needed on that one. Noah asks, when/if do you think you will use Serenity as your main OS? Who knows? But someday. Blue Yes says, will Yacht have tilde support? Like in JavaScript, you can use tilde and use variables in a string. Not sure what that means. Is that some templating thing? I'm not sure what that means. Let's see. Michael says, does Yacht spawn multiple processes for building translation units like C++ with cmake/make files, or does a single process compile the whole application? John Blow, writing Jai, believes that using multiple processes is one reason why C++ compilation is so slow. All right, wait, hold on. It seems like I disconnected there for a moment, but now I should be back up. Let's see if anybody can hear me. I got a notification here that I was disconnected. Stream is back. Woot! All right, yep, sorry about that. No idea what's causing it, but it is what it is. All right, so as I was telling Michael, Yacht actually does build everything as a single compilation unit right now. Which is probably not a good thing, because it means that you touch anything and you have to rebuild everything, because everything is baked into one CPP file. Eventually we'll want to split things out. And it's partly true what John says, that C++ compilation can be slow if you have a lot of separate files that end up doing a lot of the same work. And if you're using a lot of templates, for example, that does end up happening a lot, you know, because say that you're writing an application with 1,000 files and every one of those files includes your vector.h. Now you have to compile vector.h 1,000 times, which is at least like the default setup that you find. And that's pretty sad. So that's something where if you can find a way to not do that, you can potentially save a lot of work. But we'll see what the solution ends up being in the Yacht universe eventually. I'm personally very interested in finding ways to make compile times fast, but it's going to be driven by profiling and tracing. So especially Clang has some nice tracing features that allow you to trace it and figure out what's taken up all the time, and then you can respond to that. And it's like any performance problem, you know, we just have to profile it, figure out what's weird, and then do something differently. See if we can make it fast. Let's see. Thomas was saying there's certainly lots of optimization opportunities in browser aside from a JIT engine. Dang right, Thomas, you are very right about that. It's absolutely chock full of things that could be much smarter, and things that could be cached, things that we don't have to do in the first place. There's just endless opportunities. Like, I would say there's easily 100 things that we should do before even thinking about whether a JIT compiler would make things faster. Like, they're really big opportunities, and all that it takes to find the big opportunities is to just get a profile of something and actually look at it, and you'll find, wait a minute, why would I worry about a JIT compiler when this thing spends half of the time just concatenating strings or something like that? Let's see. Requity said, Andres, can you check my math homework? I'm not sure that would be helpful. I'm not great at those things, actually. Let's see. Jeja says, well, hello, friends. Joining late again. What have I missed? Well, you missed me glitching out of the Matrix. Stream dropped for a moment there. And it's a pretty typical classic office hours stream today, I would say. People asking about SerenityOS, asking about Yacht, asking about the future. Not so many questions about the past today, but a little bit about the present. And Jeja, by the way, let me shout it out right here, has recently made a GitHub sponsors page. And obviously, I am signed up to sponsor Jeja, who does amazing work on our fonts and various other things in the Serenity projects as well. Like, have you seen Jeja's website, SerenityOS.net? It's full of fun little subdomains that that you can check out, where you can find out about our ports that we have for the system. You can learn about the fonts that we have, things like that. Big shout out to Jeja for the awesome SerenityOS.net. And definitely just an awesome person to have in the project. Now I'm advertising Jeja, but I'm happy that you're here. So let's see, what were we talking about? Did I miss something? I guess we were talking about browser performance. I got so disoriented with the stream dropping. Browser performance in the inspector, right? Yeah, so browser performance is definitely, it's a tricky area because there are a bunch of browser benchmarks, but it's not necessarily the case that they are representative of actual web pages. I find that, at least with Serenity's browser, it's so immature that you can find better optimization targets by just pointing it at a random website like google.com or whatever, and then maybe like scrolling up and down or something, profiling that and just finding huge problems. You don't have to go chasing like theoretical micro benchmark problems. There are so many big problems that need help. And it's been so long since I did profiling and optimizing type video. I definitely miss doing that type of stuff. I have my head so deep in the Yacht bucket right now that I'm just gonna try to finish that to the point where I feel good about it. Bernd is asking, what is in your opinion the neatest feature in Yacht so far? Well, that's a question that I like. And I have to like look at the code a bit to see what I like. I guess something I really like, which at first I thought I was going to really dislike, but I've come to really enjoy, is the absence of semicolons. This code that we're looking at right here, for example, I mean, just some random code that I happen to scroll over, but it looks so light to me. And I think the absence of semicolons is a huge part of that. It makes the syntax so uncluttered, I guess. And I also like that we took out the parentheses here, like many other languages have done. So don't require these parens. You can still put them, but we don't require them. And there's something about the syntax. It just feels so lightweight. I feel like I'm writing a high-level language when I'm using it, and I think that's a really good feeling. Like JT describes it as pseudocode, like it feels like you're writing pseudocode almost. And I'd like to preserve that that feeling as much as possible. JCS says that all the color kind of clutters it up. You would say that, you monochrome person. See what JCS is doing. What is JCS doing? Working on amend. That's the old school source control thing. But see, listening to this person about like what source code should look like. But definitely go and check out JCS's stuff, by the way. He makes awesome videos. Do the colors clutter it up? I like the colors. I definitely do. Let's see. Wicked Energy says, it's like that there's less cognitive overhead to the code without the semicolons. Right. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. If you can reduce cognitive overhead by making the language really expressive and just remove unnecessary sort of syntactical noises. And there's still a bunch of things that we need to improve. Like, I don't like that we have to say .iterator to be able to iterate over something. You know, we should get rid of that. And all these little details, like right now we can't implement comparison operators, so we have to have a comparison function. So we call those equals, but it would be nicer if we could say things like that. You know, there's all these little things that we want to sort of incrementally do to improve the language further, but one thing at a time. But yeah, that's I think that's my favorite sort of feature of the language, if you want to call it that it takes on this high-level pseudocode-ish feel while still being a low-level language. Let's see. CCLX was saying, speaking of semicolons, have you tried languages without curly braces, and what's your opinion on such languages? I've tried Python, for example, where indentation is significant, and I don't love it. I find it a little weird. I think I do prefer the curly braces. But it is an interesting thought, right? Like, what if you would just stop requiring the curlies and do it based on the indentation instead? I don't know. I find it harder to read. Like the curlies, they help me understand where the scope is, and I think it's the absence of the closing curly that makes this harder for me to parse, like mentally. Like the opening curly, I could probably live without, because there's the implicit opening anyway by the increased indentation of the next line, but the closing curly, that seems important to my brain. I don't know. Let's see. HZN1 said, hello, my dear Andreas. Well, hello, my dear HZN1. Have you heard about the Hax programming language? You might find some inspiration in their code when designing Yacht. They also have a JIT machine used in their game engine. I have heard of Hax, but I have not written enough of it to have an opinion, but I did read some introductory information about it. I've read like the introduction and like tutorial of like probably 30 programming languages in the last months, while just evaluating many different ones. And at some point they kind of start to blur together. You forget which one you're looking at because there's just so much overlap. And, you know, of course, in classical fashion, my solution is, oh, we should just make another one so that we can do it our way. But my alibi for that is that that we've already established with SerenityOS that this is what we do. But yes, I have looked at it, and I'm sure they have some nice ideas, but I can't say that anything stuck out as something that I wanted to steal right away. But maybe I haven't looked closely enough to spot the unique nuggets of hacks. Typically, like any language is going to have at least some ideas worth stealing, but I don't know what they would be for hacks because I just didn't spend enough time with it. Let's see, Mike Ackers was saying, well, hello, Andreas. Well, hello, Mike. I know Yacht is designed to interop with C++, but what's the story interoping with Yacht from C++? Do you have to deal with lots of strange Yacht types, or is it smoother than that? So, we haven't really opened this can of worms yet, or because we're still like busy actually building the compiler, but ideally, what we'll have is a situation where the types will be sort of predictable. Like if you look at a type in Yacht and you look at a type in C++, you will be able to just tell what it will look like from the other side, if that makes sense. And the main thing in Yacht that does not have a direct equivalent in C++ is enums, because we have, Rust style enums, which are some types. What do they call it? Algebraic some types or something like that. There isn't like a direct one-to-one C++ equivalent of that. So that's an area where no matter what we do, how we do this, we're gonna have to have like a little document that describes what will my type look like from C++, or what will my type look like from Yacht? How do I interact with it? But we'll also have IDE support to help you sort of discover the type as you use it. Like, just basic stuff. Like if you're trying to use a scope here, then you can type the dot and you'll discover what's on it. And I find that oftentimes this is enough for me to use something that I haven't used before, just by being able to autocomplete and finding sort of what's available on this value. But like at a high level, the idea is that interop should be easy, straightforward, and unsurprising, like least surprise possible. Let's see. Jeremy WTB said, what are your feelings on projectional, non-plain text-based programming languages? I don't think I'm interested in that. I'm interested in text-based programming languages. What's my Patty M8 asking, what are my thoughts on if expressions or ternaries? No strong feelings at the moment. We'll return to you later with strong feelings, perhaps. Maik says, have you seen Odin? It looks like an interesting language. I have seen Odin, and it's one of many languages I've seen recently, and I don't know that there's something in particular that I would steal from Odin, but I didn't spend enough time with that either, perhaps, to discover what to steal. It's tricky because there's people every day, at least once a day, suggesting that I look at some other language, and if I looked at every language in depth that people told me to look at, I would still be looking at languages. So there's definitely, it's definitely good to look at other languages, but at some point you have to sort of stop and actually work on the thing you're working on. That's not to say that I don't appreciate that people give suggestions. It's just that there's only so many hours in the day, and I have to move forward and like get stuff done. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Paul says, hello, Andreas. What was the design decision to use angle brackets for both list and dictionary? Dictionaries feel nice with curly braces. The reason we use angle brackets for dictionaries is because they are indexed with angle brackets as well. So if you have something like this, foo123, then the way that you would get this value out of it is that you would say foo like that, right? You wouldn't say foo like this. So it seemed intuitive that you would use angle brackets, like, or are these called angle brackets? I guess angle brackets. You would use these brackets to declare it just in the same way that you would access it. That was the thinking. Let's see. Blue says, how are you able to make an enum with a value with parentheses and then call it as if it were a constructor? I'm not sure I understand the question. How are you able to make an enum with a value with parentheses and then call it as if it was a constructor? Yeah, I don't understand the question, sorry. Valtteri asks, have you seen Cosmopolitan and the actually portable executable stuff? Right. I have. That was made by Justine, right? Who makes Cosmopolitan, libc, and the actually portable thing, and the Red Bean, which was all the rage today. I'm a fan of Justine's, and I think anybody who reads Justine's blog will probably become a fan of Justine as well. So definitely recommend checking out her stuff. Let's see. Mike says, do you have any tips for someone trying to get an internship in software engineering? An internship in software engineering. I guess apply to internships. I don't know. You know, I had a bunch of interns, but I never knew where they came from. They were sort of just given to me by management at the places where I worked. They would show up one day and just say, Andreas, we're getting you an intern. So I don't know what was the process that brought them there. I could have asked, but I never thought to ask, like, what brought you here? I was overwhelmed by just having to manage an intern, which managing interns, by the way, is fantastic. I love doing it. But I never interviewed them or did any kind of screening for interns, so I don't know what they look for or how to get in. I imagine that to an extent it's like, if you don't apply to places, you're probably not going to get an internship. So I imagine that you need to go apply to places. And I'm just gonna not say more than that because I don't actually know anything about this. So whatever I say would just be guesswork anyway. Let's see. Mateos says, do you have in mind any syntax for doing compile time stuff in Yacht? So at the moment, I don't have any particular syntax in mind for that. There are many language features that I would like to have, but rushing to add them all at the same time is not the strat that we're going for. As I mentioned earlier, we are just trying to bring up the self-hosted compiler. Once that works, then we will get back to the place where we're like adding features as we find them necessary or we find them helpful. And compile time stuff it's interesting. It's definitely been cool in C++ to be able to do certain things at compile time, but as cool as it is, you have to also weigh it, at least like in a project like Serenity. You have to weigh it against build times. Like, should you do something at compile time if it ends up making the build like that much slower? Then maybe it should only be in compile time when you're doing like a release build or something like that. I don't know. It's like the build time of Serenity has really spiraled, and it takes a long time to build these days. And I wonder what I wonder with Yacht, like what we should do, what kind of things we should do to make sure that we don't make this permanently worse. Like, it's going to be temporarily worse for sure, while the language matures and we figure out like how to get good compile times. But like, what's a design that brings us healthy, fast compile times in the long term? And I haven't thought enough about like where compile time code execution fits into that. Maybe there is like a really obvious great answer to this, but I don't know what it is. I see projects like Zig, who are like very obsessive about compile time, and they're also very obsessive about compile time code execution. So I do think that there's definitely some kind of workable solution there, workable approach to that, but I don't know exactly what it is. Let's see. Mike Acker says, where in the system would I look to find the metrics of the window border for the current theme? Regarding PR 14131, that, my friend, is a very specific question. I love specific questions like that. Let's dig into it. So first off, let's look at this issue right here. Okay, so you want to find out the metrics of the window border. So step one is to figure out what is this issue about, just to make sure that we don't have an XY problem. When a dialog is created, the position is checked against the desktop's rect and repositioned to be entirely visible. If the dialog is larger than the desktop's rect, it is just centered. Okay. So center within parent dialogs can appear off screen by default. Okay. And let's see. A 20 pixel offset is needed at the top of the screen. So are you hunting the 20% offset? I see. And then here, my past self has actually answered. I don't remember this. Right. Yeah. So in Serenity, as you know by now, the window frame is not part of the window geometry. So you are looking for the metrics of the window border for the current theme. Let's see. I'm sure we can figure out where that is. I forget what this thing is called exactly. This will be some kind of a metric. I think probably title height is what you're looking for. The window border is going to be the title height plus the border thickness. Let's see. Let me start up Serenity so we can look at a window here. So the border thickness is represented on both the bottom and the top of the window. So just getting a magnifier. And let's zoom in a little bit. All right, so here we have, I don't know, 3 pixels of border thickness above the window title. Title is this brown thing. So you have the border thickness plus the title height, and at the bottom you have border thickness once again. So those would be the metrics, and you'll find them in the system theme struct. Which you can access. Let's see. Do we have anybody who accesses this title height? It's in the palette. Okay, right. So if you have a palette, which you can get from any, let's see which program you were in. What are you editing here? libgui, center within parent. You are in dialog.cpp. Okay, so in dialog.cpp, so here you're creating a window of some type. So the thing you want to look at here is the palette. Which, do we have a palette? This. We don't have a palette. We can get a palette from the application. Okay. So you can get a palette, and then once you have that, you can ask for the window title height. And you can also ask for the window border thickness. So I would think that this would be the size of the vertical size of your window frame. Plus, of course, the window height. So something like this. I hope that makes sense. Let's see. Jan was asking, how do you feel about documenting code? Skimming through Serenity Codebase, I don't see much high-level documentation of classes and functions. Right. I don't typically feel strongly about documenting code. I tend to favor having like really, really expressive names for everything, long, expressive, verbose names, and so far, at least hundreds of people have been able to figure out how Serenity works in the various parts without any kind of, typical code documentation. So I do think that it's not as required as some people think. That said, it's absolutely the case that you could accelerate or simplify bring up of new people or onboarding of new people by having a bit of documentation in some cases. And I'm absolutely all for adding documentation like that. Like before I started working on the Yacht language, I was working on a document about the web engine. So libweb, what was it called? Okay, I don't know where that thing is anymore, but there's a document that describes the process that the browser takes from like loading a page to painting the page on screen. Here, libweb from loading to painting. So I think like high-level code documentation like this is a good thing to write sometimes for more complex parts of the system, but I don't think I would ever require somebody to write it. I would prefer to focus on writing extremely readable code that people can figure out from reading it, which has been working really well so far. And yeah, I think I used to think a bit differently about it. I used to think the documentation was like really, really, really important until I worked on WebKit, where they just don't have that approach to programming. Like instead it's written in a very very descriptive, expressive style with verbose names for everything, and people obsess about choosing the correct name for everything. In WebKit code review, like very often they just argue about names more than anything else. And I guess I kind of adopted that culture over the years that I spent working on WebKit, and I've brought it with me to Serenity, where I think more about what things are called than other things often. Let's see. Mateus says, about compile times, do you have any strategy to reduce compile times in the future? Maybe rewriting parts of Serenity in Yuct is involved. Right. So one thing that we can do with Yuct that's very hard to do with C++ is that with Yuct we can generate, in theory, we can generate like the optimal tiny pieces of code and compile only the things that change. Whereas with C++, things are sort of, our C++ files are sort of bundled together, like by class, for example. So you have a class and then you have class.h and class.cpp. And if you edit anything in the class definition in the header file, well, then you're screwed. You have to rebuild everything that included that class. If you edit the CPP file, you have to rebuild the whole CPP file. Now, in theory, in Yuct, we could generate smaller units of C++, right? So that even if you edit some part of a class, maybe we can figure out that, like, okay, well, only this part of the class actually changed between now and the previous build, and because of that, we can generate a very, very small set of work that needs to be rebuilt compared to what you would rebuild with C++. That's theoretical, of course. Right now, we are not sophisticated at all. We just generate one big CPP file, and what I'm describing is more like maybe generating 20 CPP files. Maybe even experimenting with, well, what happens if you put every function into its own CPP file? Which, you know, may be impractical in some situations because you include a bunch of headers and that becomes expensive. I think a lot of the stuff that you sort of traditionally know about C++ runtime or C++ compile times, like, oh, well, headers are expensive, so you want to have fewer headers and things like that. And those things are true, but they are observations about human C++. If you generate C++, I feel like there's less established knowledge about like what tricks you can do to make generated C++ compile faster. So that's an area that we'll have to explore when we get there. But I am optimistic. I think it should absolutely be possible to make Yuct compile faster than C++. I guess when I say compile faster, I'm almost always talking about incremental builds, because those are the types of builds that I generally do. If you look at like full system build, like you're building the system from scratch, then that's, I don't know if we can make that significantly faster while still using C++. But I'd like to think that we can make incremental rebuilds significantly faster. Like you edit 1 or 2 files, you rebuild. That's the thing that I do hundreds of times every day. That's the thing I want to be fast. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Kook was asking, do you have an Android or an iOS phone? And would you like to run an actual Linux or some other OS on mobile someday? I have an iOS phone, and I like it. I have no problem with it. I don't know that I would want to use a Linux phone. I don't know what the benefit would be. My iOS device works really well for me right now, so I'm happy with that. Kook says, one thing you could do is omit the white space of generated code, I guess. Well, in the great scheme of things, white space takes basically no time to process. The thing that takes time to process is, well, it varies, but in C++, what we're seeing right now is that templates take a long time to process. Like when I'm building the Yuct compiler, there's like seconds and seconds, like 4 seconds or so that just are spent instantiating C++ templates. And that's not great. And we have some ideas for what to do with that, but it's going to, there's always trade-offs. And it's going to like whatever we end up doing, there are trade-offs with readability of the generated code, and also the way that we currently use templates means that we can lean on the C++ compiler to do like additional checking, additional safety checks, diagnostics, things like that. Ultimately, of course, we want to do all the static analysis and safety checks in the Yuck compiler, but at the moment we sort of use the C++ compiler as a safety net for bugs that we don't catch. And that safety net is costing us a lot of build time at the moment. So it's something that we may want to give up sooner rather than later, but I don't know. We'll see. Let's see. BlueYes says, I believed you missed my big previous message. I try to explain it my best. Okay, hold on. In your making a JSON parser video in Yuct, you made enums for the JSON value in types, and you returned them in functions with arguments like a class constructor. And it generated a class-like thing when you printed them in console. That was the question? How are you able to make an enum with a value and then call it as if it was a constructor? So that's a thing in Yuct that you can do. In Yuct we have, the enums in Yuct are more like the enums in Rust. I need a terminal. So, so we can make these things that look like this. We'll have an A that has maybe a name and an age. And then you instantiate it like this. BlueYes, age. I'm gonna guess that you are 17. So yeah, that's a concept that does not exist in C++. Of course, C++ does not have this type of enums, but the closest thing we have in Serenity C++ is the ACK variant, which is sort of it's a sort of a container type, if you will, that can contain one value of one of many different types. So an instance of foo can only be one of either A or B, and depending on it, if it's A or B, it has different fields or different subvalues. It's a very useful programming pattern that is used heavily in Rust and Swift and many other languages. And I found that after I got access to it while messing around with other languages, then now I just want to use it for everything. And I feel like almost irritated with C++ that it doesn't have it. So it is a fantastic feature. Okay, so you're 16, but coming up on 17. All right, well, I was close. All right, so I think it is a bit early, but I think I'm gonna have to end the stream because I do need to get going and do some stuff. So yeah, we're gonna wrap it up here. So I'm just gonna say thank you to everybody for coming. I really appreciate that we do office hours. I'm so glad that people come here, that you ask the questions, and we can talk about all these interesting topics. I hope that I was able to give interesting answers to some of the things. And as I always like to say, if you end up working on Serenity or Yuct over the weekend, then come hang out with us on Discord, share what you're working on. Let's see some screenshots, stuff like that, because programming is fun, and it's even more fun when we do it together. And thanks again for the super chats, and I will see you all next time. So, bye.